Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. Got a special treat for you today. Matt Tardio, if you have not seen him on YouTube, you should have. You need to go look at @AngerTab on X and I think on YouTube as well.
YouTube Speak the Truth. Yeah,
Oh,
YouTube Speak the Truth.
okay, so Speak
Yeah.
the Truth podcast. Yeah.
There you go.
I've been watching him lately and he's got some really good stuff. And so I wanted to bring him on ours and let him tell us about himself. So I've just met him myself. So Matt, it's good to meet you. And thank you for being with us today. Hey folks, you ever feel like your brain's in a fog, no matter how clean you eat or how much you work out? Well, it might not be burnout or overtraining. It could be something most people never even think about. Parasites. Yeah, parasites. Dr. Alan McDonald's research found a direct connection between chronic parasitic infections and neurological issues like multiple sclerosis. We're talking inflammation, nerve damage, long-term cognitive decline. That's why I'm going to do a full body cleanse at least once a year, and I think you should too. The Wellness Company makes it simple with a powerful combo, ivermectin and mebendazole, two of the most trusted medical-grade antiparasitics, now in one straightforward protocol. No trendy herbs or gimmicks, just real science. All you do is fill out a short intake form online, and they ship you a 3-month supply right to your door. Making America healthy again starts with you. And the Wellness Company is making it easier than ever by getting hard to access medications into your hands. So you can get them quickly, safely, and without the usual red tape. So head over to twc.health/hotzone and use code HOTZONE to save $60 and get free shipping. Cleanse your body today, and you'll be glad you did. All right, let's get back to our video. I know you're former Green Beret, former cop.
Right.
Give us a little bit of your history and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I did almost 16 years in the military, about 4 years in combat total. Throughout my time in there, I started off in the infantry and then transferred to the dark side a little bit later in my career. I got med retired there towards the end. I guess just a little cool fact. I ended up walking through the side of the mother of all bombs. Got to talk to the people that watched that sucker go off, and
Wow.
had a great time down there in that valley. Yeah, no, that was a good ride. That trip was a good trip. We dropped, I want to say it was about 90% of the ordnance in Afghanistan that year, within a 3-month time span in that tiny little valley. We blew that place to shit.
Wow.
After I ended up getting out, I went to law enforcement. Didn't really know what the heck I was going to do with my life. I was expecting to, fully retire, at 20 years. God had other plans. So so I did that for a couple of years. And then, I discovered that there was a huge issue within law enforcement. And it goes down to like training, money, lots of other things, right? You would think that these two worlds like intertwine where military and Leo go. And there's a lot of guys that want to get out of the military and go train law enforcement. There's a lot of little nuances that they just don't know about.
Cultural things and stuff, right?
Well, you got cultural things, but then you also have legal considerations, right, to take place. And there's different things that you can go about doing. If, in the military, you're a sniper, for example, right? So let's say I'm in the military and I'm a sniper. Primary job is going to be what? Like observation, right? Mm-hmm. Intel collection, so on and so forth. This is a lot of people, they get confused with the movies. But no, you're most of the time just eyes on target, glassing over everything. And some of that can transfer over to the law enforcement world as well. But, what we're looking for in the law enforcement side is, especially when it goes down, you're looking for, number one, target indicators, just like you would inside the military. But, I also want to know, some different types of probable cause. I want to know the different threats that are on the objective. I need to be able to push those down to the entry team. If the entry team's going into, there's all sorts of different little nuances like that. And those observation skills, I was shocked to learn some of the law enforcement snipers that I ended up training and getting after. They'd always be like, dude, these observation skills are stupid, man. Well, there's not a lot of full-time SWAT teams. You've got a lot of SWAT teams that operate out in this country that, a lot of officers are on the street and then yeah, right. And so it was amazing to me after the first sniper class I ended up putting together and putting some Leos through. One of them came back to me like the next week was like, man, you were not lying about that observation skill. He's like, you had me looking at so much stuff. Got on a traffic stop, ended up pulling out a bunch of meth from the vehicle just based off of one little thing that I was just opening my eyes looking for. And it's those different types of things I think are good cross-pollination, but you got to know how to incorporate the verbiage for the culture in order to make it happen.
So how did you get into the podcast world?
Yeah, so funny story. A buddy of mine that I served with has a several rather large YouTube channels, and he had actually started the Speak the Truth channel. And when I was on active duty, I would just go and visit him because he got out before me. I would just go visit him and hang out with him and kind of like my off time. And every now and then he'd be like, "Oh, I got to shoot videos today. I guess we're going to go kill coyotes on video then, aren't we? You know, like we're still going to hang out, friend." So I was over at his house, and before Russia ended up going into Ukraine, he was like, "Hey, Matt, you were in Ukraine, weren't you?" I was like, "Yeah." I was one of the first Green Berets back there in 2015. You know, Russia invades Crimea in 2014. Our team ended up getting, standby orders. And it went from like a 20% chance of going to a 50 to, hey, pack your stuff and get out the door. So, yeah, that was an interesting time. And I was able to see a lot of different things on the ground over there. And you really do. You see a lot of like and it's crazy to think, everybody looks at Ukraine like it should be a westernized nation moving more like further away from Russia and everything else. But people forget, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the amount of Russian influence that took over, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, it's not like the KGB agents had gone anywhere. The amount of influence and everything like that that's over inside of that country that Russia still holds to this day is mind-numbing. I think most people would be freaking shocked. I mean, that country, even back then, and they knew it, and people can go back and look this up, but I mean, if a guy really wanted to, I'm not saying that I did, but if a guy really wanted to, you can end up buying off, like entire police agencies, to get him to do your own bidding over there at that time, is how corrupt it was. And
everything was for sale. That's actually one of the reasons why they elected Zelensky, because he was kind of a Trump-like figure, and they wanted him to come in. He was not a politician. He was an actor, just like Ronald Reagan. And they wanted him to get rid of the corruption. And he's had mixed success doing that. But it's interesting to see how he's been recast as the source of the corruption. But I don't really think that's the case, at least not from my experience with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, they're judging him based on the elections and it being a wartime and everything else. I don't think Zelensky's doing a horrible job whatsoever. You can tell the man's heart's in the right place. Just, number one, by the way he's dressed, but number two, you can see when things aren't going his way or when Ukraine's actually having a bad day, you can see where it truly hurts him. The Ukrainian military, if people would go back and they would go back and they'd look at where Ukraine was at in 2014, 2015, and go take a look at the earlier fighting from the Donbass back then and the DPR and the LPR, that's exactly how I would expect American militias to look had they tried to go and do the exact same thing. Just gaggles of people running around, and it was a nightmare. So
yeah, I mean, I've embedded with groups over there that were led by some rich businessmen, some Ukrainian businessmen that outfitted his own militia with weapons and gear and everything, and they were better armed and trained and led than the actual Ukrainian soldiers were, and they just integrated them into the territorial protection units. And sent them off to war. And it's pretty amazing to see. But yeah, I got that same feeling that this feels like, the Boogaloo out here,
right.
In a way.
No, that's exactly what it looked like. And you watch it, and it's funny too, you go back and you look after the, not the Russian soldiers invaded Crimea, the little green men that we later figured out were Russians, right? There's a video that's out there floating around that I don't even think a lot of people have seen after they went in there, to where Ukraine was not trying to start a fight. They just didn't want to. They were confused when all of that happened. And they walked over with, like, holding a white flag, trying to talk to him and see what was actually going on. So it's kind of shocking to me that, people are sitting back and they'll look at this and they'll go, okay, well, Ukraine needs to give up some terrain. Anybody that's advocating for Ukraine to give up terrain, in my opinion, doesn't understand why Ukraine doesn't want to give up terrain, because they've done it. And when they did it, which they shouldn't have had to, because Russia had agreed 2 times now to not violate their territory. After they did, and Ukraine was like, okay, we'll leave it alone. The end result is a full-blown invasion by Putin. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder if the same people would say the same thing about the United States. If China took over Florida, and we'd say, well, we just want the killing to stop, so just give it up. Just let them have it. It's like, no, it's our country. We're not going to do that. And that, if you go to Ukraine, that's the sentiment you're going to get from the men on the ground, is that this is our country and we're going to fight for it. And there's no negotiations that are going to get us to give up our country. But so obviously you've probably taken a lot of flack from the Russian trolls, as have I.
Yeah,
and the sex bots and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, those guys, yeah, they make my day. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So this is, I mean, you've built a successful channel, and you've been doing this now since what? Since the war started in
Couple of years
Ukraine?
now. Yeah, I mean, I was part-time doing it since the war started. I took over it full-time about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And you know, in the time in between, a lot of people don't know what I was up to. I was actually on the board of a nonprofit. We had gone over there, you know, and when everything kind of kicked off over there, I think I was like everybody else, where it's like, all right, do I go shoot a Russian in the face, or you know,
Hmm.
what do I want to do
Go
now?
rescue people or whatever.
Yeah, and I, you know, and there was a lot of that going on too. The amount of nonprofits over there, the amount of people that thought they knew what they were doing, and I'm just going to spare particular people's names on here right now, but you know, it was crazy. Some of the stuff that was going on over there. But one of the big issues that was taking place over there was abduction of women and children that were fleeing the country. So ended up getting a hold of a buddy in the MOD, and we were the first nonprofit to actually be given physical terrain over inside of Ukraine to build shelters for displaced women and children that were inside the country, so that
Oh,
they
that's
wouldn't have to
awesome.
worry about that, right? And so what we ended up doing was linking them up to villages, and those villages had to have a solid church. And then the way it would work is, you know, we have our little, you know, I hate to call it a compound, but it's kind of what it reminded me of. Like, you want a fence, you want security, but you also want it in a safe village, right? In a place that, number one, the Russians don't know about as well, which is another challenge. But two, you know, one of the biggest issues, and you know, like, look at Gaza, for crying out loud, right? Like, don't feed the wildlife, because it's just going to keep taking more, right? So you want it to be able to be self-sustainable. And the way we were able to do that was by tying it, you know, you build it and it's there. They've got their own safe space. They've got their own place to live. And then they're able to integrate in with the village, and then through the village and through the church, they're able to do everything that they need to for that family. So, or for those families, excuse me. So
Does that nonprofit still exist?
it doesn't, we ended up shutting it down about a year ago.
Okay. So do you feel like you did some good with it? Or?
Yeah, for dang sure. Yeah, I know we did. I watched it happen. I know we did.
Yeah, that's great. I know that there was a big need. I was there from 3 weeks before the war for about 4 months, and then I spent another couple of months back and forth. You know, since the war. You know, I just go basically once a year now. Last 2 years, nothing's
Yeah.
really changed.
No.
So where, you know, when you are commenting on this from your military perspective, who's winning?
Define winning, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
if we want to be honest about it, define winning. Right now, Russia is holding Ukrainian territory, right? If you want to define winning by numbers, Ukraine's winning. If you want to define winning by public perception of Russia should have steamrolled Ukraine by now, Ukraine's winning, right? So we need some metric to measure here about what it is.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when it comes to that, you just look at the goals that each of the countries has set.
Right.
And so far, Russia has not obtained its goals whatsoever.
No.
Ukraine's goal is just to survive. And so far, so good. Maybe like the guy that jumped off a 50-story building and he's halfway down now. But so far, they're still surviving. So
Right.
at least in terms of human cost, it looks to me like the human cost has been worse on the Russian side, from
Yeah.
what I've been able to ascertain from my trips over there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of always the case. I mean, look at Gaza, you know, Palestinian issue. Those guys have lost a lot more people than they killed on October 7th because of
Facts.
October 7th. You know, right?
Well, and they don't care. That's the sad part.
Well, yeah, and they actually want that, right? I mean, that to them, that's
Yes.
a weapon that they can weaponize against Israel.
Correct.
So, you know, I think that as veterans, we can bring something unique to the conversation when it comes to news. I can tell you, for example, the day that the war started, or the day after the war started in Ukraine, I was in Kyiv, and there was only one or two hotels that were still open for journalists, and so all the journalists were in those hotels, and the street corners out in front of the hotel were just lined with every different news agency on the planet out
Yep.
there, and I'm standing there next to some CNN guys, and we could hear explosions off in the distance. As it turned out, it was Ukrainians shooting back at the Russians. So we're listening to that, and they're doing their lives, and they're going, we're hearing very loud explosions right now, and that
Yeah,
means
I
that
remember that.
that
Yeah, I was
that
trying not
means
to
that
die. Yeah.
the Russians are pushing into the city and will soon be taking over. And I'm like, guys, that's outgoing fire, and that's
Right. Yeah.
probably 20 miles away. And they're like, no way, you
Yeah.
couldn't hear it if it was 20 miles away. I'm like, oh, heck yes.
Yeah, you can.
And that's a different sound than the sound of incoming.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so that
it
means
is.
that they're holding off the Russians. So you're telling people the exact wrong thing. And of course, those guys, anything that drove by painted green was a tank. Didn't matter if it was
Sure.
a VW bug,
Right.
stuff like that. So, I mean, I think
Yeah.
because of the arcane nature of the military and the culture and everything like that, as veterans, we can bring something to the table when it comes to talking about crisis that other people don't have. Do you agree?
No, 100%. I think it bringing some gravity to it as well. Bringing gravity to the situation, explaining why things are the way they are. These wars that we're now seeing, it wasn't even like that during the global war on terror, right? It is to where today, as something's unfolding over there in Kiev today, or over inside of Gaza, or wherever it is across the Middle East, over pick it, Libya, whatever, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, even though they have this huge freaking comms blackout every time something happens, we get up to date footage almost every single time when these things are happening. And I think what's happening is the world's a little bit shocked to see what war actually looks like. I think that's half the problem, and having to explain to them how things go down,
Right. And it's easy to not understand what you're watching if you don't have any background in it. And so it helps to have somebody who can read between the lines and sort of read the combat environment and help people understand what's actually happening. Just like I said, with the incoming versus outgoing, sounds of explosions.
Yeah.
So I think that's super valuable, and I'm glad to see you doing this. You obviously have a lot of experience at it, and I like watching your stuff. So what do you see happening over the next, let's say, 3 years? As far as, if you had to, I mean, I know there's 1,000 things that can happen tomorrow that none of us can plan for, but if you extrapolate out from the current conflicts, I mean, I guess maybe the better question is, what does it depend on? If we're hoping for a positive resolution to any of these conflicts, what does that depend on?
Yeah, so positive resolution, that's a really good question. If we're talking about the Middle East, that's easy, so I can start there. Everything across the Middle East, the base driving factor behind a lot of the major terror organizations in the Middle East is Iran, is the IRGC, is the Ayatollah. And so if you want to crush a lot of the radical Islamic terror that's taking place over in the Middle East, you kind of got to start there. But I also have another fear with Jelani over inside of Syria. Are you familiar with his background?
Oh yeah, I was in Syria last week.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but when the Al-Nusra Front got asked to, or basically told by Baghdadi that they're going to be a part of ISIS, Jelani kind of stepped back and he said no. He's and his outward-facing agenda was that he thought that the Islamic State should be Syrian-centric. That was kind of like the line that has been quoted about him, right? It should be focused on Syria, not outward. I dove in kind of deep into him a couple weeks ago and was looking him up. Did you know that he had a claim to Muhammad's bloodline, the Prophet Muhammad's bloodline?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Ended up finding that out. And
I was surprised to find that he had spent like 6 years in prison in Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
By American citizens.
Yeah. Well, it's the same crap that we complained about.
Right.
Like we take those dudes in Iraq and we throw them in the jail, and then they turn into super jihadis and when they get out on the other side. But I mean, he's been saying for a very long period of time that he does want to have, a Sunni Islamic State, like another Islamic State over inside of Syria. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up declaring himself caliph over Syria, if you will. That to me is a very, very big concern. Very, very big concern across.
I'm sure you find yourself face palming as much as I do when you see the reaction of the world leaders to this guy, who was there, falling over themselves trying to get there so they can kowtow to him and have him over for lunch and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like, it's worse than Soleimani. It's worse than having Soleimani running the country.
Right. Right.
But
and I ran into, I mean, I talked to a whole bunch of people when I was in Syria. Some of them had escaped from Manbij, which is under the control of the SNA right now. And they're like, I talked to one guy that escaped from Damascus, and he's like, they're instituting Sharia law. They're saying one thing to the media that goes to the West, and they're doing something different on the ground.
Yeah, the amount of slaughtered Christians and just people dressed in Western clothes that I've seen is disturbing. That's been coming out of there. Yeah, absolutely disturbing. Right, Chuck, if you don't mind, I kind of got a question for you, Chuck. Can I pick your brain for a sec? What do you think about Turkey?
Well, I'm not a real fan of Turkey, just specifically because I am pretty tied to Armenia. I was the only American television journalist to cover the war in 2020 between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Okay.
And that did not go well for Armenia. And the Russians brokered a ceasefire by promising to bring in about 10,000 troops to keep the peace. Well, then as the war dragged on in Ukraine, they kept siphoning people off to the point where Azerbaijan was like, well, there's nobody watching. And so they went 2023, September, and took the rest of what they call the Nagorno-Karabakh district, which was all Armenian. This is Armenian homeland for millennia, right? But it was because of the way that the Soviet Union, that Stalin divided up Armenia and Azerbaijan when he created Azerbaijan in 1917. It was an exclave of Armenia, so it was inside Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan's just wanted it, ever since. And so they finally said, the time is right to do this. And they just went in and ethnically cleansed 120,000 people, pushed them all out. So anyway, I've been there. I was there reporting on that on October 7th, and then got the call to go directly to Israel.
Sure.
And was there for months. But the long and the short of it is, Turkey and Azerbaijan speak a very similar language. It's a Turkic language, and they want to form something that's called they call the Pan-Turkic Alliance. And Azerbaijan has an exclave of their own called Nakhchivan that's on the other side of Armenia from Azerbaijan proper. And they want to connect those two. So they have a vested interest in taking over Armenia. This is the only Christian country in that area. It's Georgia, I guess, is a Christian country too, but it's the first Christian country on earth. They declared Christianity in 301 AD.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they are surrounded. It's a lot like Israel in a way. They're surrounded by enemies that want to see them, killed. And Turkey has been quietly encouraging Azerbaijan and even sending drones to bomb Armenians from time to time in the intervening several years. So, obviously, Erdogan is straight up Muslim Brotherhood. When I was in Syria during the fight against ISIS in 2018-19, we actually got proof of Turkey giving about $600,000 to ISIS in Syria to support them. And then we were watching one of their bases, an ISIS stronghold, when they were really losing in 2019. And the next morning, it got dark. Then the next morning, when the sun came up, the ISIS flag was gone, and a Turkish military flag was there. And about, I would estimate conservatively, 40,000 ISIS fighters just changed their uniforms and became Turkish military, or what they now call Free Syrian Army, or the Syrian National Army, which is kind of the United Nations of ISIS. The bottom line is, everybody over there, whether it's SNA, SNA, FSA, ISIS itself, because they still exist over there,
correct,
or HTS, they're just different facets of the same thing. And all the people, if you talk to a Druze, if you talk to an Alawite, if you talk to a Syrian, a Syrian Christian, Chaldean Christian, Armenian Christian, or Kurd in Syria, all of them will tell you this whole thing, HTS, the whole thing, is being driven by Turkey. Yeah. And so they all know it, and they're like, there's no way we can submit ourselves to them. Is that Turkey's been trying to kill the Kurds for a decade. So there's going to be a lot more bloodshed in Syria, without a doubt, and Turkey's going to be behind most of it.
You want to hear an interesting fact? Just something that's just really fun to know. One, I've got a friend that's very familiar with that area. I'll tell you about this individual offline, so you can validate this statement, because it's actually comes from a very reliable source. About if media personnel would like to interview ISIS fighters, they are doing so over inside of Turkey. Now, the next one ended up coming out of Afghanistan, and I remember when this hit, and it was weird because at the time, this was 2016 over in Kabul. Turkey was the largest NATO supplier of troops to our mission over in Afghanistan at the time. They were also in charge of HKIA. And the Turks they'd go out and they'd do their other patrols. And there's some stuff that I can't say on video. I'm going to probably talk to you about later about them. But ISIS made a boo-boo and actually took out a Turkish up-armored vehicle that was patrolling outside of HKIA. And ISIS decided to issue a formal apology within 24 hours to the Turkish military and apologize for killing their Muslim brothers.
Yeah, I mean, they kill lots of Muslims, but the ones that support them, they realized they were biting the hand that fed them.
Kind of weird how they issued an apology for killing those Muslims and not all of the others, right?
Not all the other Muslims, right? Oh, that's fascinating. Wow. So, are you? Here's a question for you. Do you have any plans to travel to Ukraine or Israel or any place, Syria or any place like that anytime soon? I mean, is that part of your?
That's an off-topic conversation for us, Chuck.
Okay. All right. I don't know that much about you or your family situation and all that. So
it has to do with some of the things that I've done while I was in Ukraine, and Russia knowing exactly who I am.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the reason I can't go to Turkey, because I've done. Turkey has more journalists in prison than any other country on earth.
Sure.
And they've been known to snatch people out of the international zone of the airport that are just going through Turkey. And I've done so much negative reporting on Turkey that I can't go back to Turkey. I would love to. It's a beautiful place, but I probably, at least until Erdogan's gone, I probably won't be able to.
I was talking with the IDF last year trying to get into Gaza before they had gone into Rafah. That was my goal, was to be able to get down and go into that Rafah. Like, I wanted to go into Rafah. I had a Israeli SF unit, the unit commander, everybody had blessed off on it. And I just needed the PR to step off and say it's okay, because I was trying to embed with this Israeli SF unit, because what I wanted to do was document the tunnels in between Rafah and the Sinai Peninsula.
And Egypt, yeah.
Correct. Over in Egypt. Right. And
let me guess, you couldn't get them to sign off on it.
They wouldn't do it. And I'm like, look, I don't know who I got to talk to, and just continue to push and push. But they ended up saying no. So
same thing. I've had so many invitations from military units, military commanders on the ground in Gaza to go in, and the public affairs just won't even consider it. It turns out, the Israelis really don't want any news coming out about Gaza. They would love for it to just sort of get onto the back pages. And of course, the media is not going to allow that to happen, but the media is all trying to sandbag Israel and make everything Israel's fault. And it's frustrating for me that here I am, we've had when I was there with CBN, they've had a bureau in Jerusalem doing positive news stories about Israel for 30 years. And I mean, there's nobody that's in our office that's going to sandbag Israel. And so they know that, but yet they're still not willing to do it. And they keep saying, well, we put out video for you. You don't have to go in. I'm like, no, that's not how journalism works, man. You're one of the belligerents.
The other thing that I would actually like to see, so that we know it's not like a propaganda piece, is a guy like you or me going in, number one, with those units. So I remember, oh man, God, so many places I can remember, like either after liberating from ISIS or a different terror organization, and the reactions that those people ended up having within that area. A lot of thankfulness ends up coming out of it, right? Yeah, a lot of thankfulness ends up coming out of that. And I think that beyond the shadow of a doubt, there's several locations like that are going to exist all throughout Gaza. as the IDF goes and clears it out or starts dealing with all that crap. And it would be interesting to get that captured. I do think there is a good chunk of them inside of there, which I don't know what they're going to do with. But it would be interesting to see that. It really would.
It's going to be really hard for them. I mean, they're nowhere close to ending this thing.
No, it's, I tried telling them, you're looking at a decade plus. The uprisings and things like that everybody had seen taking place inside Gaza. I tried to explain, this standard of unconventional warfare. When you're going to go in, you're going to uproot an insurgency and what needs to happen, in order for that to take place. And you've got to have another government that's ready to step up and take its spot and start leading those people from within there. You got to have a voice of those people. You can't do like what we did with Afghanistan. What was it? Karzai, right? Yeah. Taking Karzai, plucking him out of Chicago and just dumping him over in Kabul. That didn't do us any good, right?
Congratulations, you're president. Yeah.
Yeah, right. No, it doesn't work that way. But you got to have somebody amongst the people in order to do that. And so
that the people want. And
correct.
After 15 years or more of just raising everybody in Gaza I say this all the time, and I wanted to, as a last question, kind of ask your opinion on how you make the moral judgment when you're going to report about something, how you realize like who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side of this. And for me, it's about, I want to make a moral judgment first. I want to understand, who's got the moral high ground here. And obviously, if you were minding your own business on October 7th and your neighbor just came in and kicked in your door and raped and murdered 1,200 people, that's pretty cut and dry. That's pretty simple. And there's a lot of people that try to make arguments about, well, this has gone on for, whatever. But the bottom line is there was a ceasefire on October 6th and they didn't have to, there was nothing that compelled them except hate to do what they did. So when you look at that and then you see the absolute destruction that it's had on Gaza, and we were just talking about this with a friend today, they're still offering $5 million reward for anybody that'll turn in information that'll lead to the safer return of one of their hostages. $5 million and a passport and a place to live anywhere you want in the world. Correct. And nobody will take them up on it. And that just is mind-boggling to me, but nobody.
So yeah, the way I find that moral high ground when I look at it, you're right. Number one, even in Nazi Germany during World War II, Jews would be hidden, right? And they'd be working them out, and all of these different like Nazi occupied lands, all of that, it happened. You don't see that in Gaza. You find bodies, and it was odd. The last American that got shot in the head down in Rafah inside one of the tunnels.
Kirsch.
Kirsch. A female that had been a medic over inside Israel, who was frequently calling into my show and providing updates on some of the things that were happening, had called in immediately following that. That was June of last year. And as she's on the phone, as she's calling in and she's on the show, that school is up there, and she recognized that. I think it was like the Mickey Mouse on the wall right over the tunnel. And she's like, oh my God. She's like, I was standing right inside of there. She's like, we were in that building and we didn't find that. Like that tunnel system that was so well hidden. Well, I mean, how much time do you have? How much time do you actually have to do these clearing operations and to make these things happen? Yeah. But when I look at moral high ground, I look at statistics. I look at it and I say, okay, inside of Gaza, city the size of Las Vegas, you had at the beginning estimated 40,000 enemy combatant trigger pullers inside of Gaza, 40,000 enemy combatants. Most of the time you're going to have times 10 for that, for their direct support network, your people that are moving, weapons, munitions, bodies, whatever it is that they need, lookouts, et cetera, right? So you've got this support network. So that's 250,000, right? That we're now looking at, almost 250,000. And so, almost 450,000, not 250. Yeah, 450,000. Right. It's a quarter. So it's about what, 20% of Gaza? 20 to 25% of the population directly supports Hamas. 20 to 25% of the population directly supports Hamas. Now, out of those direct supports, and you start looking at that bloodline as that goes out and those family members, and it becomes common sense. And where you go, where did they get this ideology from that this is okay? Right? Not that Gaza is occupied, but all of Israel is occupied, and they can accomplish things by any means necessary. They can go out, they can rape, they can pillage, they can kill, right? They can strap bombs to whatever. It doesn't matter. buses, have at it. All is fair in love and war, right? So I think that when you analyze that bloodline and where that comes from, you realize that that's how those people are being raised. And you can take modern urban combat. You can take the United States military over inside of Iraq between 2003 and 2013. We killed an estimated 39,000 and some change enemy combatants. During that same 10-year time frame, so for 39,000 enemy combatants dead plus, right, 39,000 some change, there was almost 140,000 civilian casualties at that exact same time, 140,000. And now you take that number and you throw it over into Gaza. And it's estimated that right around 20,000-ish Hamas fighters killed, right, wounded, or just out of commission, estimated 20,000. Those numbers, once you start chipping away at what the Gaza Health Ministry is putting out, and you start chipping away and you say, okay, well, 100% of Hamas is Palestinian. They don't. I'm sure you know all of these things, and your listeners do as well, probably, right? You start chipping it away, you're down to less than a 0.5 to 1, right? 0.5 civilians to 1 enemy combatant killed. That is
that's never been seen before in warfare. I mean, as far as I know. It's always a multiple of civilians that die compared to enemy combatants. And this is especially remarkable when the enemy is actually trying to get their people killed.
Correct.
I mean, they really want those people to die. It's just unbelievable.
Well, Israel was giving them a way out, you know. Israel was giving them a way out. When, the United States military, we go in and we do our cordon and search, right? We're going to set that whole area off and we're going to clear that sucker out. We're going to make sure they're gone. They were making sure that those civilians had a route out. From a lot of these different locations during their first clearing operation. They made sure that the civilians had a way to get out, even after they warned them. And this is with civilians burning the leaflets that'd be dropped from the sky and telling everybody they're not going to leave. It's just, it's mind numbing to me that there's that much destruction over there and that many people are alive. That's actually a testament. And I think people who don't study or understand or have partaken in a war do not understand how amazing that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-blowing to me. There's actually more Palestinians today than there were on October 7th in Gaza. I mean, well, I guess, they haven't had a lot of television to watch, so they didn't have much else to do but breed. But holy cow, people, they're trying to replace those Shaheed very, very quickly. Pretty amazing stuff. We're out of time, but I really enjoy it. I hope we can get together again, and love to explore some collaborations with you from time to time. And tell people where they can find your channel and your socials and all that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can look me up over on YouTube at Speak the Truth Podcast, or you can find me over on X at AngerTab, ANGERTAB. I got Ranger Tab with the R cut off because someone cut the R off my dang Ranger Tab one time. I thought it was funny. But, walked around in that for like 3 days before I noticed.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on in short notice, and we'll get this out to the viewers, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of good feedback. So God bless you.
Great. God bless.